In the mist-shrouded Appalachian mountains, Claire Dawson, a solitary mountain woman, was about to challenge the land villagers swore was cursed. What started as a routine herb-gathering trek turned terrifying when shadows twisted unnaturally around her. Claire wasn't your typical villager. Decades living alone among peaks and valleys had made her fiercely independent and skilled in herbal lore. When a black wolf silently emerged from the fog, she had no idea she was stepping into a malevolent force, and her defiance would awaken the mountain's dark secret, leaving the ridge and village forever changed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn crept over the Appalachian peaks, soft tendrils of mist curling around jagged rocks like sentient fingers, brushing the forest floor in silent, spectral caresses. Claire Dawson crouched among the low-lying shrubs of her small garden behind the weathered cabin, hands steady as she gathered sprigs of thyme, sage, and mountain mint. The aroma of crushed leaves mingled with the damp earth, sharp and earthy, a scent that seemed to anchor her to the land she had known since birth. Each plant, each root and stem, was a lesson memorized from years of practice and countless mornings spent under her grandmother's watchful gaze. Her grandmother had taught her the language of the mountains, how to read the moss growth on tree trunks to predict rain, how the wind carried stories if one listened, and how the subtle bends in a stream could reveal the hidden dangers of the terrain. Claire paused for a moment, inhaling the scent of the herbs, and allowed her fingers to brush over the soil, feeling its texture, its subtle vibrations beneath her hands. The mountains had been her cradle, her playground, her sanctuary. Yet as the first shouts of the village rose with the morning sun, she felt an undercurrent of tension that seemed almost foreign to her solitude. From the ridge above, she could see curling smoke from the chimneys of the scattered Appalachian homes, a comforting yet fragile signal of human presence amid the vastness of nature. The villagers were gathering at the market. Their voices, at first a gentle murmur, grew louder, punctuated with the occasional laugh, cough, or bark of a dog. But beneath the surface of daily chatter, an undertone of fear pulsed. Claire listened intently, as she always did, attuned to the nuances that escaped casual notice. "They say the northern ridge takes those who wander too far," a woman whispered to her companion, glancing around nervously. "Old Lutz boy, gone 20 years ago, vanished without a trace." Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. Tales of the cursed land were not new to her. She had grown up with these stories, tucked into bed with the mist creeping through the mountain hollows, the wind whispering warnings her grandmother rarely translated in full. They were cautionary tales, lessons meant to instill respect or fear, but in her they sparked curiosity. And now, as she listened to the villagers, she felt the familiar tug of intrigue, a mixture of skepticism and longing. Henry Lott's voice cut sharply through the market's hum. "Claire Dawson." His tone carried the hard edge of someone who had suffered, someone who had loved and lost, and carried the weight of grief like a permanent coat. He approached with determined strides, eyes dark with a history of fear and resentment. "I hear you're thinking of wandering again," he said, the words heavy with unspoken memories. "You need to listen this time. That ridge, it's cursed." "I've buried too many hopes there." Claire lifted her chin, meeting him steadily. "Cursed, Henry? Or just feared?" Her voice was quiet yet firm, threaded with a defiance that had earned her both admiration and criticism throughout the village. Henry's hands curled into fists at his sides. His brother had been claimed by the northern ridge decades ago, and the memory festered in him like an open wound. "Fear can kill you as surely as any curse," he said, voice low but sharp. "I lost my brother there, Claire, and I've seen enough to know the mountain doesn't forgive." The villagers nearby lowered their voices, sensing the tension between the two. Some watched with curiosity, others with worry. Claire exhaled slowly, letting the wind carry away some of the tight coil of emotion within her. Her pulse quickened, not from fear but from the pull of the unknown. She had always felt it. Even as a child, a restless, insistent curiosity, a need to confront what others avoided. Later, in the quiet of her cabin, Claire ran her fingers over a worn photograph of her grandmother, faded but unmistakably sharp in her memory. The old woman had been a mystery herself, part healer, part storyteller, part sage of the mountains. "Claire, child," her grandmother had said as they kneaded herbs into small bundles, "the mountain has a heart. Some say it is dark, that it hungers, but it listens and it tests. Never go seeking what you cannot understand, unless your spirit is steady and your mind clear." Those words had settled in Claire's mind like seeds, dormant yet alive, waiting for the right moment to sprout. Her grandmother's death, shrouded in speculation and whispered theories, had left a void that no amount of daily life could fill. Some villagers claimed the mountain had claimed her. Others whispered of sickness or accident. Claire had never accepted either explanation fully, and the mountain had been calling her ever since. The market chatter faded behind the walls of her cabin as she packed for the day. She selected dried herbs for survival and salves for injury, a small knife, a coil of rope, and her grandmother's leather-bound notebook, filled with cryptic notes, sketches, and marginalia about plants, terrain, and local folklore. Every item was chosen not just for utility, but for understanding, a means to record what she might see and to survive it. By mid-morning, the village had fully awakened. Smoke from chimneys spiraled upward into the mist. Dogs barked, children ran through the dirt lanes, and neighbors called greetings across the small market square. Claire's figure, small yet resolute, crossed the narrow bridge over the creek that marked the boundary between the village proper and the rising forested slopes of the northern ridge. The villagers watched silently, some whispering about her bravery, some shaking their heads at what they perceived as recklessness. Henry lingered at the edge of the clearing, arms crossed, eyes tracking each step she took with a weight of worry that made his posture rigid. At the trailhead, Tommy Wheeler waited, his young face taut with concern. "You always have to go where the mountain tells you not to, huh?" he asked, shifting his pack nervously. His loyalty was unquestionable, though tempered by the knowledge of what lay ahead. He'd grown up alongside Claire, exploring hidden glens and secret hollows, yet the northern ridge held a darkness that no child's imagination could fully comprehend. Claire's lips curved into a faint, grateful smile. "I need to see it for myself, Tommy. Will you come?" He hesitated. Stories of vanished men, whispers of madness, ruins swallowed by forest growth. They pressed on him from every corner of his memory. But the unwavering determination in Claire's eyes was a force that outweighed fear. Finally, he stepped forward. "All right," he said. "But we stick together. Whatever's out there, we face it as a team." As they began their ascent, the forest thickened. The air grew damp, dense with the scent of pine and wet earth. Mist rose in ghostly sheets, curling around tree trunks and roots, obscuring the path ahead. Claire led, her boots crunching on leaf litter, eyes scanning every shadow, every subtle shift in the environment. The mountains seemed alive, and perhaps they were. The rustling of leaves could be wind, but it could also be something watching, waiting, testing. Shadows moved at the edges of vision. Claire noted them without alarm, relying on the lessons her grandmother had instilled. Observe, do not react rashly, record everything. Tommy's breathing grew shallow, his youthful face pale beneath the grime of the trail. He whispered again of the tales they had grown up hearing, of those who ventured too far, of the strange sounds that haunted the ridge after dark. Despite his fear, Tommy's presence was a comfort. He grounded her, reminded her of human connection in a place that already felt uncanny. And yet, with each step, Claire's curiosity deepened, a growing ache that demanded answers. Hours passed. They discovered an abandoned campsite, charred remains of a fire and remnants of tattered clothing, evidence of explorers who had come before. The air around the site felt heavier, charged, almost sentient. Claire knelt, brushing the dirt aside to uncover a fragment of a leather journal, its pages brittle but legible. Scribbled words hinted at strange phenomena, shadows that moved independently, whispers that promised madness, a presence that seemed to anticipate every thought. Tommy's hand trembled as he pointed toward the northern ridge, now looming like a jagged sentinel against the morning light. "Claire, maybe we should turn back," he said, voice tight. It doesn't feel right." The stories were true. She shook her head slowly, turning the journal in her hands. "We can't run from it, Tommy, not now. There's something here, something that needs understanding." Her voice carried a mixture of certainty and apprehension, the balance between fear and curiosity that had always defined her. The mist thickened as they pressed on, and the forest around them seemed to close in. Trees twisted unnaturally, roots coiling over each other like serpents. Shadows deepened and fleeting shapes danced in the corner of Claire's eye. She recorded every familiar scents and sounds of the village were fading behind them, swallowed by the dense forest. Marcus adjusted the straps of his pack, the leather worn smooth with use, and recalled the tales he had chased across Appalachia, vanishing travelers, whispers of madness, and a land that seemed to breathe malevolence. He had come to study, to document, to conquer myth with observation. But watching Claire move forward with that unshakable determination stirred a different feeling: unease. Meanwhile, Claire's boots pressed into damp soil, each step deliberate as the trail narrowed beneath overhanging branches. Mist hung low, dripping from leaves and gathering in small rivulets that wound around roots and stones. She glanced over her shoulder at Tommy, who followed closely, eyes wide and alert. The forest around them seemed almost aware of their presence, branches swaying without wind, shadows shifting where the sun's light should have reached. "This path, it doesn't look like the others," Tommy whispered, voice trembling slightly. He paused at a fork, where one trail led up the ridge steeply and another descended into a shadowed hollow. "I don't think we should go this way." Claire crouched, examining the tracks in the soft soil. Animal prints intertwined with deeper, more deliberate impressions, boot marks that belonged to humans long past. "We have to," she said finally, voice calm but firm. "Look at the way the ground has shifted. Something's been moving through here recently. Someone or something. And it wasn't us." Tommy swallowed hard. The stories the villagers told, the disappearances, the madness, now pressed in on him with every step. Yet there was a part of him that, like Claire, wanted to see, to understand. He adjusted the strap on his pack and nodded. "All right," he said quietly. "But promise me we stick together." "No heroics," Claire smiled faintly. "No heroics," she said, though her eyes scanned the forest with a mixture of fascination and caution. The further they ascended, the more the mist thickened, dampening sounds and softening the edges of reality. The forest seemed alive with subtle movements, a shadow that darted just beyond vision, the distant rustle of underbrush, and faint, echoing calls that could have been wind or voices. Claire recorded these observations meticulously in her notebook, jotting down details of moss patterns, tree formations, and the way the mist clung to the rocks in unusual shapes. Each observation was a thread she hoped would lead to understanding. Hours passed, and the trail became more treacherous. Roots twisted like serpents, and stones slick with moisture threatened to send them tumbling into the void below. The forest floor was littered with remnants of past expeditions, charred wood, broken tents, and fragments of journals like the one Claire had discovered before. One such fragment, partially buried beneath a tangle of roots, caught her attention. She knelt, brushing dirt from the worn leather cover. The pages inside were brittle, covered in spidery handwriting, accounts of explorers who had entered this very ridge, only to vanish or return with eyes haunted by visions of the mountain's heart. Tommy shivered as he leaned closer. "Look at this," he said softly. People really went mad here. And yet you're not afraid?" Claire traced a finger over the words. "I am," she admitted quietly, "but fear tells us something. It tells us where the danger is, how the land reacts. It's not just the stories, it's something else. Something alive." The air grew heavier, thick with mist that clung to their skin like a cold veil. Claire noticed subtle anomalies. Trees that bent at impossible angles, shadows that moved independently, and fleeting glimpses of figures just beyond the line of sight. Each instance sent a shiver down Tommy's spine, yet Claire's focus sharpened. Her grandmother's lessons echoed in her mind. Observe without panic, record everything. Trust your instincts, but question your senses. As they navigated a particularly narrow ridge, the mist parted briefly, revealing the skeleton of an old campsite. The remnants of a fire pit, surrounded by charred stones, sat as silent testimony to past visitors. Fragments of tattered clothing and a broken pan lay scattered, bleached by time and weather. Claire knelt again, her eyes scanning the area. There were markings on the trees, symbols etched with sharp tools, hints of rituals performed long ago, perhaps to appease whatever dwelled in the mountain's heart. Tommy's voice trembled. "Claire, maybe this is a warning. Maybe we shouldn't be here." She looked at him, her eyes softening. "Warnings are everywhere, Tommy. In the trees, in the wind, in the whispers. But understanding requires action. We can't just ignore it. We have to see it for ourselves." A sudden rustle startled them, a movement in the mist that seemed too deliberate to be wind. Claire froze, scanning the shadows. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw a figure, a man, or perhaps something else, emerge from the fog, then vanish before she could focus. Her pulse quickened, not with fear but with heightened awareness. The mountain was watching, testing, perhaps even acknowledging their presence. They pressed onward, moving slowly, every sense alert. The trail became increasingly difficult, with sheer drops on one side and thick, tangled underbrush on the other. Yet amidst the danger, Claire noticed patterns, the way certain plants grew near ancient stones, the unusual formations of the rocks, and the subtle grooves that hinted at centuries of natural and supernatural interaction. Each observation added a layer to the puzzle, a thread leading toward the mountain's secret heart. Midday passed into afternoon, and the forest grew darker despite the sun overhead. Mist thickened into a rolling fog, muffling sound and softening edges. Claire led Tommy to a large, flat rock, the perfect vantage point to survey the ridge. From there, they could see the treetops stretching endlessly, shadows moving like living waves. Tommy shivered, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "I can't shake the feeling, like we're not alone. Something's watching us, Claire." She nodded slowly, acknowledging the fear without letting it dominate her judgment. "Perhaps," she said, "but fear can sharpen perception. It makes us see what we might otherwise miss." A sudden movement drew their attention, a flicker of something metallic, glinting between trees. Claire's heart quickened. She raised her notebook, sketching quickly, attempting to capture the anomaly before it vanished. Tommy squinted, trying to make sense of it. "Is it another person?" he asked. Claire shook her head. "I don't know, but it's not human, or at least not entirely. Look at the way it moved. Deliberately, but not naturally. It's aware of us." The mist seemed to thicken in response, curling around their legs, wrapping the forest in an almost tangible tension. The sounds of the ridge, birds, insects, wind, became distorted, distant, as though filtered through layers of another reality. Claire felt a gnawing sensation at the back of her mind, an awareness that the land itself was testing her courage, her perception, her very sanity. Hours blurred as they continued. Claire kept careful notes, cataloguing every irregularity, the unnatural shadows, the fleeting figures, the whispers that seemed to drift just beyond comprehension. Each note was a lifeline, a way to anchor herself in reality, even as the ridge attempted to pull her into its strange, psychological embrace. At the edge of a small clearing, they discovered more definitive signs of previous explorers, fragments of journals, rusted tools, and the remnants of a tent, collapsed and rotting. Claire knelt to examine a torn page from one of the journals. It described visions, hallucinations, and encounters with what the writer called the heart of the ridge, alive and knowing. The words were frantic, almost manic, and yet meticulous in their detail. Tommy's voice broke the silence. "Claire, this is real. All of it, the stories. The madness. It's all true. Claire placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying both herself and him. True or not, she said, we can't let it break us. We observe, we understand, and we survive. That's how we turn fear into knowledge. The mist thickened further, almost blinding in places. Claire and Tommy moved cautiously, each step deliberate. Branches clawed at their clothing, roots threatened to trip them, and the shadows seemed to shift with intention. Claire noted the temperature drop, the subtle changes in the wind, and the way the forest seemed to fold in on itself, creating paths and dead ends with uncanny precision. As they pushed deeper, the mountain seemed to whisper directly to Claire, tugging at memories of her grandmother, lessons learned, and warnings ignored. She felt a presence, ancient and malevolent, pulsing through the soil, the rocks, the very air. It was as if the mountain itself had a consciousness, aware of their intrusion and testing the limits of their resolve. Finally, as dusk approached, they reached a narrow ridge overlooking a small valley hidden within the folds of the northern mountain. Mist pooled in the hollow below, thick and impenetrable. The view was both beautiful and ominous. Trees twisted in unnatural patterns, rocks gleaming wetly in fading light, and shadows moving with a life of their own. Claire set down her pack and took a deep breath, surveying the scene. "This is it," she said softly. "The heart of the ridge begins here. Every anomaly we've seen, it's all converging. We need to stay alert." Tommy nodded, swallowing hard. "I just hope we make it back," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the whispering wind. Claire placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. "We will, together. But understand this, the mountain tests not just the body, Tommy. It tests the mind, the heart. Fear will come, visions will come." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Touch. Faint whispers drifted in the mist, the sound of voices without bodies, indistinct yet insistent. Claire stopped, her pulse quickening. "Did you hear that?" Tommy nodded, his face pale. "Yeah, it's like the mountains talking. But not with words, just feelings. I feel uneasy." Claire knelt to pick up a fragment of a journal, half buried under moss and leaves. The leather was damp, pages fragile. Flipping it open revealed scrawled handwriting, notes of a previous explorer. "It watches always. I hear it in my mind. Shapes in the fog. They mock me. I can't trust my own eyes. Must keep moving. Must not stop. It feeds on fear." She swallowed hard, feeling a shiver race down her spine. "Tommy, these aren't just stories. They were real, and they left traces. Not just in the land, but in themselves." A sudden, sharp gust of wind rattled the surrounding trees, carrying whispers that seemed almost articulate. Tommy froze, clutching Claire's arm. "Claire, I can't do this. It's too much. We should go back now." Claire steadied him. "No, if we stop now, we lose everything. The only way to understand this is to see it ourselves. We can't let fear control us, not yet." Her voice was calm but firm, anchoring them both against the invisible pressure of the ridge. The ravine widened into a narrow plateau, the fog swirling in thick columns that obscured everything beyond a few feet. Shapes began to coalesce in the mist, twisted humanoid silhouettes, half-formed and flickering at the edge of vision. Claire's pulse quickened, her rational mind analyzing the phenomena. The figures were not fully corporeal, but not entirely illusions either. They seemed to react to their presence, shifting when observed directly, fading when approached. Tommy staggered back. "Claire, they're looking at us." "They're observing," Claire corrected, her eyes scanning the figures carefully. "Not malicious yet, just curious or testing. It's like the ridge is alive in fragments. Watch how it responds to our attention." As they navigated through the plateau, Claire noticed a pattern. The mist seemed to thicken near the shapes, creating pockets where the figures could emerge and disappear at will. The ground beneath them pulsed faintly like a heartbeat, echoing in the soles of their boots. Claire crouched, placing a hand on the earth. A vibration ran up her arm, subtle but undeniable. "It's reacting," she whispered, "to us, to our presence. To our fear, suddenly one of the misty figures coalesced more solidly than the others. It resembled a man, ragged and thin, eyes wide and glassy, frozen in a scream that had no sound. Claire's stomach clenched at the sight. She recognized the signs. An explorer, trapped between the ridge's perception and reality, a shell consumed by the curse. Tommy gasped. "Claire, what is that?" "It's a warning," she murmured, voice tight. "A glimpse of what happens when the ridge claims someone's mind. We have to stay focused. Don't let it consume you." The figure raised an arm, pointing toward the center of the plateau. Claire's heart raced. Every instinct screamed to run, but curiosity held her fast. She knew that the ridge communicated through fear, manipulation, and visions. The pointing hand was a lure or a guide. Carefully she stepped forward, motioning for Tommy to follow. As they approached, the mist thickened violently, and the air grew icy. Claire's breath formed clouds as she exhaled. The temperature drop, accompanied by an unnatural silence. The forest sounds had vanished completely. No birds, no rustle, no wind. Only the dense fog and the heartbeat-like pulse beneath her feet. Then a sound, a low, guttural whisper, unlike anything human, echoed around them. Claire felt it inside her chest, vibrating through her bones. Tommy whimpered, clutching her sleeve. "Claire, I can't focus," she said firmly, gripping his hand. "Anchor yourself. Observe, don't react. Remember what Grandma taught us." A flash of memory struck her, her grandmother sitting by the hearth, handing Claire a small carved talisman. "Fear is the shadow of understanding," she had said. "Do not let it guide your steps. Let it sharpen your mind. Respect the mountain, child, but do not cower before it." Claire felt the words resonate within her as the ridge intensified its pressure. Shapes flickered in and out of sight. Twisted faces, half-formed limbs, spectral silhouettes of explorers passed. One figure stepped closer, the scream etched permanently into its expression. The mist thickened, carrying the faint smell of damp earth and decay. "Claire, it's pulling at my thoughts," Tommy stammered. I see things. Memories, mine. Mine and hers." Claire's mind raced. The ridge didn't just manipulate sight. It pulled at memory, emotion, and perception. She had to maintain control. "Name what you see," she instructed. "Do not let it slip into fear. Recognize it as a vision, not reality." Tommy blinked rapidly. "I see. My father. He's angry, shouting at me. Then Grandma and the man from the village. Henry, he's screaming." Claire gritted her teeth, understanding the pattern. The curse extracted emotion, grief, and fear, weaving them into its reality. The more Tommy reacted, the stronger the manifestations became. She squeezed his hand. "Hold on to me. Let it pass through you, but do not let it dominate. We're observers here, not prey." A sudden movement to their left caught Claire's attention. A fragment of a tent, half buried in the mist, shifted unnaturally. Inside, the spectral form of an explorer hunched over a journal, feverishly writing with a quill that scratched against invisible paper. The figure looked up, eyes hollow and pleading. Claire felt a pang of sorrow and recognition. The ridge preserved the echoes of lives it had consumed. "This is horrible," Tommy whispered, voice trembling. "They're trapped." "They're part of the ridge now," Claire said softly. "It doesn't kill in the normal sense. It preserves fear, grief, despair. It feeds on it." The wind shifted, and with it the mist. The forms began to swirl, rising and falling like smoke, twisting together into grotesque patterns. Claire's stomach churned, but she forced herself to focus. The ridge responded to presence, to attention, to fear. If she could remain calm, analyze, and move deliberately, she could navigate the terrain without succumbing. Then, without warning, the largest figure lunged, more solid than the others, a humanoid mass of shadows and fragmented features. Tommy screamed and stumbled backward. Claire acted instinctively, gripping his arm and pulling him behind a fallen log. The figure passed through the log as if it were nothing, but for a heartbeat she glimpsed its intent, curiosity fused with malevolence. "Claire, it's alive," Tommy gasped, voice barely audible over the pounding of their hearts. "Yes," she said, voice steady despite the racing pulse. "And it's watching, learning. But it's not invincible. We move, observe, and we understand. That's how we survive." Claire stepped forward cautiously, holding her talisman in one hand, her notebook in the other. She sketched rapidly, documenting the ridge's anomalies, the movement of the shapes, the way the mist twisted. Each note was a lifeline, a method of asserting reality against the psychological assault. Hours passed, though time seemed distorted under the ridge's influence. Shadows flickered, shapes danced at the edge of perception, and the mist pressed closer, cold and wet. Claire and Tommy pushed forward, guided by instinct, observation, and the faint sense of direction that the ridge allowed. Finally, they reached a clearing, the mist parting slightly to reveal the remnants of another campsite. Broken tents, rusted utensils, and journals littered the ground. Claire knelt, examining a journal page that had survived the elements. The writing was frantic but precise, describing a previous explorer who had faced visions similar to theirs. Shapes in the mist, whispers in the wind, and the sensation of being watched by an intelligence embedded in the land itself. Tommy sank to his knees, exhausted. "Claire, I can't keep this up. It's too much. The voices, the shapes." "You can," she said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We anchor ourselves in observation. The ridge can manipulate fear, yes, but it cannot control knowledge. We remain calm, we record, we move. That's our way through." As the last light of day faded, the mist deepened, creating a shroud around the plateau. The ridge pulsed faintly beneath their feet, a rhythm that echoed in their bones. Claire could feel it, an ancient presence, malevolent yet patient, feeding on the fear of those who dared to enter. She clenched her jaw, her mind racing with calculations. How to navigate the terrain, avoid the traps laid by the ridge, and uncover its secrets without losing themselves. Night had settled over the northern ridge, and with it came a suffocating quiet that pressed against Claire and Tommy like a physical weight. The mist had thickened to near impenetrable density, swallowing the terrain around them. Every step forward required concentration, every sound or shadow amplified into a potential threat. The ridge, Claire realized, was not merely a landscape. It was an entity, patient and aware, testing their courage, endurance, and perception. Claire took a deep breath, feeling the chill of damp fog cling to her skin. She adjusted the talisman around her neck, a small comfort inherited from her grandmother. The carved symbols, she believed, offered a subtle protection, more psychological than mystical perhaps, but vital in grounding her mind. She glanced at Tommy, whose face was pale, eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. His breaths came in short gasps, visible in the cold night air. "We have to keep moving," she whispered, voice low so as not to disturb the ridge more than it already was. "There's a point in the heart of the ridge where the phenomena converge. If we can reach it, we'll finally understand what we're dealing with." Tommy shook his head, shivering. I can't. My head. It's spinning. The whispers, the shapes. They're inside my mind." Claire knelt beside him, placing a steadying hand on his arm. "It's the ridge probing your thoughts. That's all. It's not real in the sense that it can physically harm you yet. The danger is letting it consume your mind. Anchor yourself. Focus on what's around you. Focus on me." With effort, Tommy nodded, gripping Claire's hand tightly. She could feel his pulse, rapid and uneven, but there was a faint spark of resolve. It would have to be enough. Together, they continued. Along the narrow path, their boots sinking into sodden soil, fog curling around them like slow-moving water. After hours of careful navigation, the ridge began to change. The terrain became more jagged and vertical, sharp cliffs and sheer rock faces breaking up the forest floor. Trees grew twisted and skeletal, roots protruding like claws, grasping at the earth and the explorers alike. The mist was thicker here, almost tangible, curling into tendrils that reached for them as they climbed. Claire paused at the edge of a rocky outcrop, surveying the dark valley below. Mist swirled in thick, ghostly clouds, revealing glimpses of shapes that defied logic, twisted silhouettes that seemed to hover, some half-formed, others suggesting figures from previous expeditions. Claire's hand shook slightly as she lifted her notebook to sketch the forms, her mind straining to record every anomaly. "This is impossible," Tommy muttered, voice barely audible. Those shapes, they shouldn't exist." "They do," Claire replied softly, "and we need to understand why. Every pattern, every movement, it's all deliberate. The ridge is alive in ways we've never seen, but it has rules. We just have to find them." A sudden noise broke. The silence, a low, rumbling growl that reverberated through the cliffs. Both froze, eyes darting to the source. Mist shifted violently, coiling and curling like serpents, revealing a massive, amorphous shadow crouched at the far edge of the plateau. Its form was unstable, constantly shifting between human and animal shapes, limbs stretching in impossible angles. Tommy stumbled back. "Claire, what is that?" "It's part of the ridge," she said, gripping her notebook. "Not just an entity, it's the mountain itself, manifesting through the mist. It observes, tests, it reacts to our presence." The shadow moved with deliberate intelligence, shifting closer with silent, fluid motions. Claire noted the patterns, the way the fog responded to its movement, how the figures it left in its wake seemed like echoes rather than real bodies. The ridge was a living system, and this creature, whatever it was, acted as a guardian or enforcer. "Stay calm," she whispered, taking a careful step forward. "If we show fear, it will feed on it. If we observe, we maintain control." Tommy's face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. I don't know if I can. It's watching me, feeling me." Claire placed a hand on his shoulder. "Yes, it is. But remember, you're stronger than you think. Anchor yourself, focus. It's a test, not an execution." The shadow paused, as if considering her words, then lunged toward a fallen tree nearby, dissipating into the mist before reaching them. Claire exhaled slowly, her body tense. She realized that the ridge used fear as both barrier and key. Those who succumbed would likely become part of the landscape, their minds trapped in the fog. They pressed onward, navigating a narrow ledge that ran along the side of a cliff. The wind had picked up, carrying faint whispers that seemed almost articulate. Claire's talisman swung lightly around her neck, a rhythmic anchor against the unnerving reality. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shuddered, a vibration that ran from the cliffside to their boots. Trees trembled, mist roiling violently. Claire dropped to one knee, pressing a hand to the earth. "It's aware of us, our movement, our intention. We're approaching something significant, something the ridge wants us to see." The ledge opened into a small amphitheater of jagged rocks. In its center, the mist swirled in a thick, almost solid column, pulsating faintly as though it had a heartbeat. Claire felt it in her chest, a resonance that matched the rhythm of her pulse. This had to be the heart of the ridge. Tommy's eyes widened in terror. I don't want to go in there. It's alive." Claire knelt beside him, her fingers brushing his cheek. "It's alive, yes, but it isn't trying to harm us yet. This is where understanding begins. We step carefully, observe, and record. Anchor yourself, you can do this." With careful, deliberate steps, they entered the swirling mist. The fog wrapped around them like a living thing, cold and damp, pressing against their bodies. Shapes flickered in the periphery. Human figures, animal forms, twisted hybrids that vanished when looked at directly. The air was thick with the whispers of those who had entered before, echoing fears, regrets, and obsessions. Claire raised her notebook, sketching rapidly, documenting every anomaly. She noted the temperature gradients, the density of the mist, the rhythm of its movement. The pulse beneath her feet grew stronger, a faint vibration in her bones. The ridge itself seemed to react to their focus, shaping the mist and shadows in response to their observations. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the mist directly in front of them. It was partially human, partially indistinct, with hollow eyes and an expression frozen in terror. It raised a hand, pointing toward a jagged rock formation at the center of the amphitheater. Claire recognized the pattern. Previous explorers had encountered similar markers, signs of the ridge guiding them toward its core. Tommy's hand trembled as he reached for Claire. It wants us to go there. I don't know if we should. We have no choice, Claire said softly. Observation demands it. Understanding demands it. Anchor yourself and step forward. As they approached the formation, the pulse beneath their feet intensified, vibrating through the mist and into their bones. Shadows flickered violently, twisting into forms that suggested faces, hands, and open mouths, but they were never fully formed, just impressions, echoes of minds once trapped here. Claire touched the rock, feeling its cold, wet surface. Symbols were etched into it, ancient and deliberate, glowing faintly under her touch. She traced the carvings, committing their shapes to, overlapping in a cacophony of despair and warning. Claire realized the ridge was testing them, forcing them to confront their deepest fears and insecurities. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. Memories of her grandmother surfaced, lessons on courage, observation, and resilience. The mountain will take your fear if you give it freely. Observe, respect, and anchor your mind. Only then can you endure. Claire opened her eyes and guided Tommy forward. Together, they approached the largest crystal cluster. As she reached out, the mist surged violently, wrapping around them like a living shroud. Shapes flickered violently, faces of explorers, villagers, and long-forgotten figures. Some whispered names, others cried out in silent terror. The ridge was drawing upon their emotions, testing their resolve. "Anchor yourself," Claire murmured. "This is the test." She touched the crystals, noting their temperature, pulse, and luminescence. Data for later sketches, observations, and notes filled her mind, blending with the sensory assault of the ridge. A sudden vision struck her. A memory, not her own. She saw her grandmother standing before the same rock formation decades ago, whispering cryptic instructions to an unseen presence. The vision faded quickly, leaving Claire breathless. The ridge had connected her to the past, revealing fragments of guidance and warning. Tommy staggered beside her. I saw my father. He's trapped here. It's an echo, Tommy, Claire said firmly. Not reality. Focus on the physical. Observe, record, survive. She pressed her notebook to her chest, grounding herself in purpose. Hours passed as they meticulously documented the formation, the crystals, and the shifting shadows. Claire noted patterns in the ridge's behavior. The way fear intensified projections, the way observations and calm reactions seemed to stabilize the mist. Each interaction revealed more about the ridge's intelligence, its methods, and its vulnerabilities. By midday, the mist began to thin slightly. The shadows receded, leaving behind only faint traces of their presence. Claire and Tommy collapsed against the rock formation, exhausted but alive. We made it through, Tommy said, voice trembling. I don't know if I'll ever see the ridge the same way. Claire nodded, her own exhaustion evident, but her mind racing. We've survived the first real test. The ridge is aware of us, responsive, and it will continue to test anyone who enters. But we've learned something invaluable. Its methods, its patterns, and the way it interacts with emotion. This knowledge is our anchor. She glanced at the plateau, now quiet, mist curling gently around jagged stones. The pulse beneath their feet had diminished slightly, but Claire knew it would never fully fade. The ridge was alive, patient, and eternal, waiting for those who dared approach its heart. Tomorrow, Claire said softly, we push deeper. We map the interactions, study the patterns, and uncover its secrets. We survive, we learn, and we prepare for what comes next. Tommy nodded, though his hands shook. I trust you, Claire, even if I don't understand everything. And that's enough, Claire replied, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. Trust and observation. Fear will come, but we control our reactions. Step by step, day by day, we endure. As they prepared a small camp at the edge of the amphitheater, the ridge seemed to watch silently, almost approvingly. Shapes flickered in the mist, faces, shadows, echoes, reminding Claire of the stakes, of the watchers, and of the ancient force they had dared to confront. Night fell again, colder and heavier than before. The mist thickened, whispers surrounding their small fire. Claire sat close to Tommy, speaking in low tones, recording observations, and sketching the symbols etched into the rocks. She felt her grandmother's presence, guiding her through visions and memories, anchoring her mind against the ridge's subtle manipulations. Hours later, as exhaustion overcame them, Claire drifted into a light sleep. Dreams filled with shadows, whispering voices, and flickering images of the lost. The ridge tested even in sleep, probing the mind's defenses. But Claire held firm, anchoring herself in knowledge, memory, and purpose. The heart of the curse had been reached, and with it the first true understanding of the ridge's sentience. Fear would continue to press upon them, shadows would continue to flicker, and whispers would continue to pierce their thoughts. But Claire and Tommy had survived. They had stepped into the mountain's heart, faced the manifestations of the ridge, and endured. And deep within the rock formation, faint pulses echoed, an awareness that they were no longer mere intruders, but participants in the ridge's ancient, relentless dance of fear, observation, and survival. Claire whispered into the night, eyes closed, feeling the pulse beneath her fingers. We endure, we observe, we survive, and we will uncover your truth. The ridge pulsed in response, patient and eternal, as the wind carried whispers of the past, present, and future across the mist-shrouded plateau. Marcus's hand hovered over the weathered journal Claire had uncovered earlier, the ridge's mist curling around his boots as if observing his every movement. He looked up at her, a mixture of curiosity and calculated ambition in his eyes. Claire's grip on her satchel tightened, instinct warning her that his presence would bring disruption and danger. "You've gone far," Marcus said, his voice smooth but laced with an edge. "I admire your courage, but I wonder, do you truly understand what you're dealing with?" Claire's eyes narrowed. "I understand enough to know that this land, it's not just cursed. It's sentient. It feeds on fear, grief, and human weakness. I've observed, I've survived." "That's enough for now." Marcus stepped closer, brushing mist aside. "Observation is fine, but knowledge is power. And there's far more to uncover than you realize. You're playing with forces older than your grandmother's tales, older than the village itself. With the right approach, I could help you. Study it scientifically." Tommy stiffened beside Claire. "Study it? You mean exploit it? We've already seen what it does to people." Claire's jaw tightened. Marcus's arrogance irritated her, but she remained calm. She had learned long ago that in the mountains, impulsive reactions were dangerous. "Marcus, we're not here for your experiments. We're here to survive, understand, and contain, if possible. The ridge is not a specimen. It's alive." Marcus's smile was sardonic. "Alive, yes, but manipulable. Humans have always underestimated the ridge. Look at all those who disappeared, victims of superstition and fear. I aim to do more than survive. I aim to understand, control even." Claire's pulse quickened. The ridge's mist swirled more aggressively around them, almost responding to Marcus's intrusion. It was testing him, probing his mind, exploiting his arrogance. She could feel it tugging at his ambition, magnifying it, showing him visions that tugged at his ego. "Marcus," she said sharply, stepping forward, "don't underestimate it. It's not a puzzle or a lab experiment. It knows, it remembers. It will twist you if you aren't careful." He laughed softly. "Twist me? I'm prepared. Unlike some, I'm not blinded by folklore. I trust evidence, observation, and intellect." At that moment, the ridge reacted. Shadows flickered violently, and a chorus of whispers surrounded them, voices overlapping in an almost tangible wave of dread. The ground beneath their feet trembled, small rocks tumbling down jagged slopes. Even Marcus's composure faltered slightly, his analytical mind scrambling to reconcile the irrational terror pressing against his logic. Tommy grabbed Claire's arm. "See, I told you. It's testing him." Claire nodded, keeping her own fear in check. "Yes, and we must remember, we survive by observing, not reacting. We anchor ourselves in knowledge and reason. Fear is the ridge's weapon. Control it and we can proceed safely." Marcus's eyes darted around as shadows elongated, forming distorted figures that resembled past explorers, villagers, and fragments of lost souls. They reached for him, whispering warnings he refused to heed. Claire saw him falter, his arrogance shaken, and she realized that the ridge had already begun manipulating him. "You see," she said quietly to Tommy, "even the confident, the arrogant cannot withstand it. Only understanding and caution allows survival." Marcus clenched his jaw, brushing past them toward the central rock formation. "I need to see it, to study it. I cannot leave without knowing the full truth." Claire's patience snapped.
"Marcus, stop."
"You don't understand. You're playing with something that will consume you if you're not careful." He ignored her, kneeling to inspect the blackened crystals embedded in the stone. The ridge responded immediately. The crystals pulsed, mist thickened, and whispers escalated into cacophonous cries. The figures around them became more aggressive, more visceral, more demanding. Marcus's hands hovered above the crystals, hesitant yet driven by ambition. Tommy grabbed his arm. "Marcus, stop! Can't you feel it? This isn't just rocks and shadows, it's alive." But Marcus was beyond reasoning. The ridge's manipulation intensified. He was shown visions of success, of mastery, of fame and recognition for unveiling the secrets of the cursed land. Simultaneously, the ridge reflected his deepest fears, failure, ridicule, and the endless echo of the explorers who had vanished before him. He staggered, caught in the psychic tug-of-war. Claire acted decisively. She grabbed a nearby stone, striking the crystal cluster gently, but with purpose, diverting the ridge's attention away from Marcus for a fleeting moment. "We do this together," she shouted. "Or not at all." The ridge recoiled slightly, responding to the combined mental focus of Claire and Tommy. The whispers became discernible again, providing guidance rather than assault. Claire noticed patterns in the ridge's pulse, the way it reacted to emotional alignment, to control versus panic. "We can't let him destabilize the area," Claire said urgently. "We must anchor him, or we all risk being consumed." She reached out, gripping Marcus's shoulder. His eyes, wild with ambition and fear, met hers. You don't understand. I understand enough to know that this is bigger than all of us." Claire interrupted. "We survive by respecting it, not exploiting it." Her words, combined with her steady presence and Tommy's support, began to ground Marcus. The ridge's influence waned slightly as their collective focus overpowered its manipulative pull. Marcus stumbled but no longer fell. "You're strong," he muttered, his arrogance tempered by raw fear. "And resilient. I underestimated." Claire exhaled, her mind racing.
"We all have."
The ridge tests everyone differently. Some fail. Permanently, the mist shifted again, revealing more of the central formation's layout. Symbols on the rock became clearer, as if the ridge itself were guiding them toward comprehension. Claire recognized patterns reminiscent of her grandmother's teachings, rituals, warnings, and strategic placement of objects that could influence the ridge's behavior. This is exactly what Grandma Dawson spoke of," Claire murmured, tracing a line of symbols. "The ridge isn't just malevolent, it's responsive. It can be studied, interpreted, even influenced, but only with care and respect." Marcus knelt beside her, examining the symbols more carefully, a hint of humility in his demeanor. "I see now. I've been foolish. Knowledge without respect is dangerous here. You've endured it far better than I could have." Tommy looked from Claire to Marcus, uncertainty still etched on his face. "So, what now? We work together?" Claire considered for a moment, then nodded. "We survive together, but cautiously. We share knowledge, but each step must be deliberate. The ridge will test us again, and it will not forgive recklessness." Marcus nodded slowly, his usual arrogance replaced with tentative respect. "Agreed, I trust your guidance." For now, the group moved deeper into the heart of the plateau, the ridge's pulse echoing beneath their feet. Shadows flickered, and figures drifted in and out of the mist. But Claire, Tommy, and now Marcus walked deliberately, observing and interpreting each phenomenon. Hours passed, each step revealing new aspects of the ridge's power. Apparitions of past explorers, once terrifying, became less aggressive when met with calm observation. Claire guided Marcus and Tommy through rituals of attention, grounding, and careful documentation, helping them anchor their minds against the ridge's manipulations. At the center of the formation, they discovered remnants of an old altar, partially hidden beneath moss and stone. The structure radiated a subtle energy, and the crystals embedded nearby pulsed in synchrony with the ridge's heartbeat. Claire recognized the layout, symbols aligned with the cardinal directions, rocks placed deliberately, and markings indicating cycles of emotional energy. This is the source of its amplification," Claire said, pointing to the altar. "The ridge channels fear and grief through this formation, projecting it outward, influencing the landscape, the mist, and even our perceptions. If we can understand it, we can control, or at least mitigate, its influence." Marcus's eyes gleamed with analytical curiosity, tempered by the humbling realization of the ridge's true power. "So, the curse isn't mindless. It's intelligent, responsive, strategic, fascinating, and terrifying." Tommy shivered, glancing at the swirling mist. I just want to survive it, not study it." Claire placed a hand on his shoulder. "And that's why we need balance. Knowledge tempers fear. Observation stabilizes chaos. Courage anchors vulnerability. Together we can face it, and maybe, just maybe, come out intact." The sun began to dip behind jagged peaks, casting long shadows across the amphitheater. The ridge pulsed, as if acknowledging their understanding and testing their resolve one last time for the day. Claire felt a moment of clarity, a vision of her grandmother standing at this very spot decades earlier, guiding her with quiet wisdom. The ridge had been her teacher, her adversary, and her test. And now, for Claire, the lesson continued. As night fell, the group prepared a small, fortified camp at the edge of the plateau. Fires were lit, herbs spread for protection, and observations carefully recorded. Claire kept watch, guiding Marcus in maintaining focus and grounding, while Tommy assisted with practical measures. The ridge remained alive around them, whispers echoing, shadows shifting, and crystals pulsing faintly. But for the first time, Claire felt a sense of control, not mastery, but understanding sufficient to survive and progress. She looked at Marcus, then Tommy, and spoke softly, almost to herself. "We've learned something invaluable today. Knowledge and caution are our allies. Arrogance is the ridge's tool, and fear is its weapon. We endure, we observe, and we prepare. Tomorrow we move closer to understanding its true origin." The mist swirled around the plateau, responding faintly to her words, as if the ridge itself acknowledged her growing mastery of its rhythm. Deep in the shadows, faint pulses echoed, echoes of the past, whispers of the lost, and the subtle hum of an ancient, malevolent force that would not relent. But Claire, Tommy, and now Marcus were no longer merely intruders. They were participants in the ridge's relentless test, and they had learned at last the first crucial rules: observe, respect, endure. The night pressed on, heavy with mist and anticipation. The ridge was patient, eternal, and ever watchful, and Claire Dawson, standing at the heart of its power, felt the weight of legacy, the burden of knowledge, and the unyielding necessity of courage. They had survived betrayal, manipulation, and the ridge's testing. But this was only the beginning. Tomorrow, the mountain would demand more insight, more resilience, and more sacrifice. And Claire would be ready. The ridge whispered, shadows flickered, and the pulse continued, an ancient heartbeat echoing through the mist, waiting. Observing, the first light of dawn cut through the mist like a shard of glass, casting pale illumination over the twisted rocks and jagged formations of the cursed northern ridge. Claire Dawson crouched behind a gnarled oak, breath steady but senses taut, listening to the ridge's pulse, a subtle thrum beneath her feet, like the heartbeat of some ancient living thing. The mist swirled unnaturally, coiling around the trees and rocks as though aware of her presence. Tommy Wheeler crouched nearby, his bow loosely grasped in trembling hands. He kept his eyes on the shadows, glancing at Claire for reassurance. "I don't like this," he admitted in a low whisper. "It's too alive. Like it's watching us, testing us. Every step feels wrong." Claire shook her head slightly. "It is watching us. It is testing us. That's how it operates. Fear is its tool, confusion its weapon. We survive by controlling both, Tommy." Marcus Hale moved cautiously, journal in hand, muttering notes under his breath as he tried to map the distorted landscape. "Fascinating," he said, tone clipped, almost defensive. "The ridge is not only sentient, but it manipulates time perception, spatial orientation, even auditory and visual input. The alterations are subtle at first, then overwhelming. Truly remarkable." Claire shot him a glance sharp enough to slice through his academic detachment. "Marcus, stop theorizing. This isn't a lab. The ridge doesn't care about your notes. One wrong step and it'll make you disappear like all the others." The group advanced cautiously toward the central formation, where blackened stones, jagged crystals, and faintly glowing markings indicated the heart of the curse. The ridge's energy pulsed stronger here, almost tangible, making the hairs on Claire's arms stand on end. She sensed the presence of past explorers, not physically, but imprinted in the land's energy, whispers of fear and despair etched into the soil, rocks and mist. A low wail echoed across the plateau. It wasn't entirely human, nor entirely wind. Tommy flinched, gripping Claire's sleeve. Did you hear that?" Claire nodded. "It's feeding on our fear. Stay calm." She inhaled deeply, focusing on the pulse beneath her feet, attuning herself to the ridge's rhythm rather than its whispers. Every fiber of her being was alert, every sense heightened. Suddenly the landscape shifted. Rocks elongated unnaturally, paths folded back on themselves, and shadows coalesced into distorted figures. The ridge was testing them, manifesting the worst of their memories and fears. Claire's stomach tightened as she recognized familiar forms, ghostly figures resembling her grandmother, her parents, and friends long gone. "Claire," Tommy whispered, voice tight with panic. What do we do? "I can't—" "Focus!" Claire snapped, placing her hands on his shoulders. "Breathe, observe, do not react. It wants panic. It thrives on it." Marcus froze as a figure emerged from the mist, a tall, spectral man resembling his academic rival from a previous expedition, scornful and mocking. The figure stepped closer, lips curled in an expression of derision. Marcus's confidence faltered for the first time. This isn't possible," he muttered. "I know this man is dead." "Exactly," Claire said, her voice calm but firm. "The ridge pulls from your mind, your fears, your memories. It's showing you what will break you. Ignore it. Anchor yourself." The apparition lunged forward. Marcus stumbled back, nearly collapsing. Claire grabbed his arm, grounding him. "Control it, Marcus. You exist outside the ridge's illusions. The figures aren't real, they're tools. Use reason, not emotion." Marcus's breathing was ragged, but slowly he regained composure, gripping his journal tightly, as if the act itself tethered him to reality. I understand," he whispered, eyes still darting. "I've been unprepared." Claire allowed herself a brief nod. "Good, keep your mind steady. Every step counts." The mist thickened, and the terrain warped further. Gravity seemed inconsistent. Rocks shifted, cliffs appeared where none had been moments ago, and the wind carried distant screams that were simultaneously human and animal. The ridge was testing not just their courage, but their ability to interpret reality. Ahead, a massive crystal formation jutted from the ground, radiating an eerie dark light. Claire recognized it as the central node, the focal point of the ridge's power. Around it, faint trails of disturbed earth suggested repeated rituals by those who had come before. Symbols similar to her grandmother's teachings were etched into the stones, forming a web-like pattern connecting each crystal to the next. This is the heart of it, Claire murmured, tracing the symbols with her eyes. Everything converges here. The ridge channels fear and grief into these nodes. If we can neutralize or contain this point, we can weaken it, or at least survive its worst. Tommy swallowed hard. We have to touch it? Go near it? Claire shook her head. No, observation first. Understand its rhythm. Interacting prematurely will draw its attention fully. We must approach carefully, step by step. As they advanced, the ridge reacted. The ground beneath their feet pulsed with rhythmic tremors, matching their heartbeats, or perhaps forcing them to match its own. Shadows stretched unnaturally, and the figures of past victims became more vivid, their eyes hollow yet accusatory. Claire felt a chill as one of the figures resembled her grandmother, her expression somber and warning. "You've come far, Claire," the apparition whispered, voice echoing in her mind. "But the ridge will ask the highest price. Fear, grief. The cost is measured in what you love most," Claire swallowed, heart hammering. She knew the ridge was probing her, testing her attachment, her motivations, her resilience. She glanced at Tommy. He was pale, trembling, but determined. And at Marcus, his scholarly arrogance had been replaced by cautious respect, eyes wide as he catalogued everything, yet following Claire's lead. "We endure," Claire said aloud, voice firm. "We observe. We act with purpose. The ridge can try to break us, but it will not succeed, not if we anchor ourselves in knowledge and trust." The central crystal pulsed stronger, shadows coalescing into the forms of explorers who had vanished. They reached out with ethereal hands, whispering pleas, warnings, and accusations. One figure, indistinct yet malevolent, lunged at Tommy. Claire intercepted, pushing him behind her, focusing her mind on controlling fear rather than succumbing to it. The ridge responded, shifting the landscape violently. Glyph edges warped, mist thickened, and a low, resonant hum filled the air. Claire recognized it as a coordinated assault, not physical, but psychological, designed to test their limits. "We can't just survive," she said, eyes fixed on the central node. "We have to understand. Control the fear. Interpret the patterns. Only then can we turn the ridge's power against itself, or at least shield ourselves." Marcus's hand shook as he adjusted the journal's position, trying to record every phenomenon. I see now," he murmured. "The ridge feeds on unanchored emotion. Panic amplifies its influence. Calm observation diminishes it." Tommy's voice was tight. "But it's showing me memories, things I've buried. My father, the accident in the woods. I can't—" Claire placed a hand firmly on his arm. "Anchor yourself to now. The past isn't here. Only the ridge manipulates it. You're stronger than it thinks." He nodded, tears pricking his eyes, but he focused. Slowly, the tremor in his hand subsided. Marcus mirrored their steadiness, breathing deeply to counter the illusions. Together, the trio advanced toward the central node, each step deliberate, each mind anchored against the ridge's manipulations. Claire noted the subtle shifts in the crystal's pulse, accelerating when fear spiked, softening when calm returned. She realized that by maintaining collective mental discipline, they could dampen the ridge's influence. "We work together," she whispered. "Focus on calm, on observation, on resilience. Let the ridge feel our strength." The apparitions recoiled slightly, shadows flickering. The mist parted just enough to reveal a narrow path to the heart of the formation. The central crystal glowed brighter, pulses resonating through the ground. But Claire felt an internal confidence. They were not helpless. They were participants, not prey. Reaching the node, she observed the intricate patterns etched into its surface, symbols of protection, cycles of energy, and markers aligned with cardinal points. The ridge's power was immense, but its logic was discernible. Knowledge and intent could influence its manifestations. Claire knelt, tracing a line of markings with her fingers, sensing energy flow. "This is it," she whispered. "The heart of the curse, the anchor point. If we act wisely, we can survive this and maybe neutralize it. Marcus peered over her shoulder, awe and respect mingling in his expression. It's incredible. Ancient, intelligent, adaptive. And yet, you read it, Claire. You see the pattern. I never would have. No time for doubt, she interrupted. Focus, observe, guide. We must approach this with precision. One wrong move and it could overwhelm us all. Tommy steadied himself, bow lowered but ready. I'm with you, Claire. Whatever happens, Claire nodded, drawing a deep breath. The ridge pulsed in acknowledgement, shadows twisting, mists thickening, the whispers growing louder, but now they were countered by the trio's collective clarity. Knowledge, courage, and trust formed a protective barrier, however fragile, against the mountain's relentless test. The confrontation had begun, not with violence, but with intellect, resilience, and emotional fortitude. The ridge would push. The ridge's pulse reverberated beneath Claire's feet like a living drum, each thrum resonating with a force that seemed to press into her bones. The mists around them had thickened to an almost tangible density, curling like serpents around the jagged rocks and twisted trees. Shadows flickered, not just as tricks of light, but as solid shapes that moved with intent. This was no longer merely an environment. They had entered the consciousness of the ridge itself. Claire knelt beside the central crystal node, her fingers tracing the etched symbols. The dark light pulsed in harmony with her heartbeat, almost as though it were alive. She could feel the ridge's sentience probing, testing, measuring. It sought weaknesses, amplifying fear and doubt, but her focus remained steadfast. Claire, Tommy whispered, voice tight, It's showing me things. Terrible things. Shadows from the past. Things I thought I'd buried. I can't. Anchor yourself, Claire said firmly, placing her hand on his shoulder. Remember now, remember here. The past isn't real. Only the ridge makes it feel real. Breathe, observe, resist. Marcus knelt on the other side, flipping frantically through his journal. His notes detailed everything. The crystals, the shifting landscape, the distorted perceptions, the apparitions. The ridge adapts, he said, voice trembling despite his scholarly demeanor. Every emotional fluctuation, every panic response, it uses it. It's feeding on us in real time. Claire's gaze swept across the plateau. The apparitions of past explorers hovered, their forms clearer than ever, eyes hollow yet brimming with anguish. Some reached toward them, others recoiled in fear. Each one was a fragment of the ridge's memory, a record of every soul that had touched this place and failed to endure. We need a strategy, Claire murmured, more to herself than to the others. Fear is its weapon. Observation is our shield. Knowledge is our anchor. Together we can manipulate its response. Marcus blinked, suddenly aware of the rhythm Claire had fallen into, the subtle cadence of pulses, the way the crystals reacted to emotion, the fluctuations of light and shadow. You're right. If we act deliberately, if we maintain emotional discipline, we can survive, Claire interrupted, her eyes narrowing at the central crystal. Yes, survive and learn, but the ridge is intelligent. It won't let us proceed unchallenged. The mist thickened to the point of near blindness, and the shadows coalesced into figures of immense height and dark presence. They whispered in a cacophony of voices, some pleading, some accusing, some mocking. The ridge was testing their mental fortitude, pressing them to their breaking points. Claire inhaled deeply, closing her eyes for a moment to center herself. She envisioned her grandmother's lessons, the old chants, the symbols, the deliberate focus on clarity and courage. She opened her eyes and spoke, voice steady and commanding, "We are not prey. We are observers. You cannot manipulate us if we do not falter. We face you with knowledge and respect, not fear." The figures recoiled slightly, their forms flickering and distorting. The mist began to part in subtle waves, revealing glimpses of the central altar. The ridge's pulse remained, but its rhythm seemed to adjust in response to their mental discipline. Tommy, inspired by Claire's calm, steadied himself. I can do this," he whispered, drawing on the courage Claire had modeled. "Focus, observe, don't react." Marcus exhaled, the arrogance that had driven him now tempered by fear and respect. We can influence it, he murmured. We aren't powerless. Our collective focus can counteract some of its effects. Claire gestured toward the central crystal. Carefully. Approach together. Observe the patterns, trace the symbols, note the pulse. Any sudden movement or surge of fear, and the ridge will exploit it. Steady, deliberate together. They advanced as one, each step measured, each mind tethered to clarity. The ridge responded, shifting the landscape, rocks elongating, paths folding, cliffs appearing where none existed, but they ignored the distortions, focusing only on the node. As they reached the central crystal, the air thickened further, charged with energy. Claire could feel it pressing against her consciousness, probing for doubt or weakness. She took a deep breath and placed her palm on the surface. The dark light pulsed beneath her hand, rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to sense the energy flow, tracing its patterns mentally. It's communicating, she whispered. Not in words, but in pulses, in rhythms. It responds to intention and observation. Calm and purpose weaken its influence. Marcus crouched beside her, documenting everything in painstaking detail. Incredible, he muttered. It's a sentient ecosystem of energy, memory, and emotion. The way it reacts to fear and focus is astonishing. And yet, under your guidance, we're not only surviving, we're influencing it. Tommy's gaze flickered across the shadows, and he saw faint outlines of figures recoiling. It's like it's listening, he said. Watching, reacting to us. Claire nodded, her mind attuned to the ridge's pulse. Exactly. This is how we learn. This is how we survive. By understanding its logic, we can mitigate its attacks and eventually control our interactions with it. The shadows shifted again, forming a figure she recognized, her grandmother's younger self, standing silently at the edge of the altar. Her gaze was calm but piercing. Claire felt a surge of clarity and purpose. "You're ready," the apparition whispered, voice echoing in Claire's mind. "But the ridge will demand more. Courage, knowledge, sacrifice. Its heart is not easily swayed. Only those who endure the full measure of fear may stand at its center." Claire's chest tightened, but she nodded. "I understand. And we endure together." Marcus hesitated, glancing at the shadows, then at the central crystal. The previous explorers, they failed because they were divided, distracted, or consumed by fear. We must maintain unity and focus. Only then can we proceed." Tommy tightened his grip on Claire's arm. "I'm with you," he said firmly. "Whatever it asks, we face it together." The ridge reacted to their unity. The mist swirled violently, forming tendrils that sought to separate them, to isolate fear in each mind. But Claire, Marcus, and Tommy held steady. Each pulse of the crystal synchronized with their collective heartbeat. Each shadow's attempt to frighten was countered by focused observation. Claire began tracing the symbols etched into the crystal's base, mentally aligning them with the ridge's pulses. The dark energy seemed to flow into her hands, not as pain but as information, patterns, rhythms, cycles of influence. She realized that the ridge could be understood, its power interpreted, and if carefully managed, contained. "This is it," she whispered. "The heart of the ridge. Observation, respect, and collective clarity are the keys. We endure, we learn, we survive." The shadows shrieked, mist coiling tighter, trying to pierce their resolve. But the trio remained steadfast. The ridge's pulse, once chaotic and overwhelming, began to synchronize with their calm focus. They had learned to communicate through intention, to interpret fear and emotion, and to resist manipulation. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time had little meaning here. The ridge tested them relentlessly, pushing their minds to the brink. Visions of past failures, lost loved ones, and deepest fears assaulted them. Yet through unity and disciplined focus, they endured, each challenge revealing more of the ridge's logic. Finally, the central crystal pulsed with a steady, radiant glow, the mist receding slightly, shadows withdrawing. The ridge's heart had acknowledged their resilience, and in doing so had granted them temporary mastery of perception within its domain. Claire exhaled, exhaustion mingled with triumph. She glanced at Tommy and Marcus, both pale, trembling but alive, eyes wide with awe and newfound respect. "We survived," she whispered, almost in disbelief. "Not because we conquered it, but because we understood it. We respected it. We endured," Marcus nodded slowly. "And we've documented everything. Every pulse, every symbol, every reaction. This knowledge, it's invaluable. But it comes at a cost. One misstep, one surge of fear, and we could have been lost." Tommy shivered, still processing the intensity of the experience. I can't believe we made it through. I thought we'd die here." Claire placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's why we survived, together, focused, calm. We were not prey. We were participants, learning the rules of the ridge. And now we move forward, stronger than before." The ridge's pulse continued beneath their feet, steady and rhythmic. The mist slowly lifted, revealing the plateau's jagged beauty in the pale morning light. The shadows of the past explorers lingered faintly, silent witnesses to the trio's triumph. Claire felt the weight of legacy pressing on her. Her grandmother's wisdom, the courage of those who had come before, and the lessons of survival in this living, sentient land, all converged in this moment. "We've reached the heart," she murmured. "But our journey isn't over. The ridge is eternal, patient and cunning. It will test us again, but now we understand, and we endure." The trio packed their equipment carefully, documenting every symbol, pulse, and observation. As they prepared to descend from the central plateau, the ridge seemed to acknowledge them, not as intruders, but as worthy observers, temporarily aligned with its rhythm. Claire looked once more at the central crystal, letting its pulse sync with her own heartbeat. She whispered a vow to herself and to the ridge. "We endure. We observe. We respect. We survive." The mist parted slightly, revealing a path downward. The ridge's pulse continued, a constant reminder of its presence, its sentience, and its challenge. Claire, Tommy, and Marcus stepped forward together, ready to face whatever lay ahead, knowing that they had survived the heart of the ridge and that the lessons learned here would shape every step of the journey to come. As they moved away, the ridge whispered faintly in the wind, shadows flickering like echoes of the past. But for the first time, Claire understood they were no longer helpless wanderers. They were participants in an ancient living puzzle, and they had begun to master its rhythm. The mountain loomed silently behind them, eternal, patient, and aware. And Claire Dawson, leading her companions, who felt a resolve unlike any before, knowledge tempered by respect, courage strengthened by unity, and fear transformed into the very tool that had once threatened to consume them. The journey was far from over. The ridge had many more lessons to impart, but they had survived its heart, and that survival was only the beginning. The wind carried faint whispers, carrying memories of the lost and echoes of challenges yet to come. But Claire's gaze remained forward, resolute. Together they would endure. Together they would observe. And together they would face the next test, stronger than before. The ridge waited, eternal, as they descended. But now its pulse was no longer a threat alone. It was a rhythm they could feel, interpret, and in small measure influence. The heart of the ridge had been confronted. The first victory, subtle but profound, had been won. And in that understanding, the mountain granted them something far more precious than survival: insight, clarity, and the courage to continue. The mist swirled one last time, shadows dancing lightly at the edges of vision, as if acknowledging the endurance of three souls who had faced the impossible and had not faltered. The ridge remained eternal, patient, sentient, and Claire Dawson, leading her companions, walked forward, forever changed, yet ready for whatever lay beyond the next peak. The pulse of the ridge echoed in their minds, a living heartbeat of knowledge, fear, and power, a force to respect, endure, and perhaps one day master. The journey continued. The descent from the ridge felt heavier than the climb, though their bodies were no less weary. Every step back toward the village carried the residual pulse of the mountain, a rhythmic reminder of the ordeal they had endured. Mist still clung to the valleys below, drifting lazily among the trees, as if the ridge itself had followed them, carrying whispers and shadows along the path. Claire led the way, eyes forward, muscles taut yet steady, every nerve alert to both the natural terrain and the faint residual energies that seemed to cling to them. Tommy's steps faltered more than once, his fear from the ridge still raw, still echoing in the deepest folds of his mind. "Claire, he began, voice trembling, but she placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, anchoring him. "I know," she said softly yet firmly, "but we're together. That fear is ours to control, not the ridge's. Remember that." Marcus followed, notebook clutched to his chest, hands smudged with ink and the residual dust of the central plateau. He looked between Claire and Tommy, eyes wide with a mixture of awe, relief, and a creeping sense of fear. I can't believe it. I thought I understood curses, folklore, even psychological manipulation, but what we just faced, it's beyond any theoretical framework I've ever studied. And yet, his voice faltered as he gestured toward Claire. "And yet we made it through. Somehow we endured." Claire didn't respond immediately. Her mind remained partially on the ridge, still feeling the faint rhythmic pulse as if it were a distant heartbeat, alive and aware. But as the path opened to familiar trees and signs of wildlife, she felt the grounding pull of the real world. Birds called softly, a brook gurgled nearby, and the familiar smell of damp pine filled her lungs. It was almost jarring to feel normality again, after hours, perhaps days, in the altered rhythm of the ridge. The village lay ahead, partially shrouded by morning mist, quiet and seemingly unaware of the events unfolding high above. Yet Claire knew the inhabitants would sense a shift. They had always felt the mountain in subtle ways, its moods reflected in weather, animal behavior, even in the unease of those who dared approach its peaks. And Claire herself had changed. She could feel it, not just in the knowledge she now carried, but in the subtle rhythm of her heartbeat and thoughts, forever aligned, at least in part, with the living pulse of the ridge. They reached the edge of the tree line, and the open fields of the village came into view. Smoke rose from chimneys, a few villagers moved through early chores, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and baking bread. For a moment, the simplicity of the world struck Claire, a contrast so profound it almost made her falter. Then a figure stepped into view at the edge of the field. Henry Lott, leaning on his cane, face pale yet hardened with concern. His eyes, sharp and wary, tracked their progress. "You," he began, voice tight, "you made it down. All of you?" Claire slowed, letting Tommy and Marcus fall slightly behind as she approached. "We did," she said simply. "We survived, but it wasn't easy." Her gaze swept over the familiar fields, the village buildings, and the small market stalls preparing for the day. She could see curiosity blooming in the villagers' eyes, a subtle tension in the air. They were sensing something had changed, even if they didn't know what. Henry's lips pressed into a thin line. "I warned you, Claire. That ridge, it isn't just superstition. People have gone there and never returned. Others came back, mad, broken, speaking nonsense. You've been lucky, or cursed." Claire's jaw tightened slightly. "Luck had little to do with it," she replied. "The ridge is sentient, yes. Dangerous, yes. But it isn't indiscriminate. It reacts to what we bring to it, fear, courage, clarity. We endured because we understood and because we worked together. Knowledge, Henry, that's the difference." Henry's expression remained skeptical, but there was a flicker of something else. Respect, perhaps, or even understanding. "Knowledge or arrogance," he muttered, though his voice held less bite than usual. Marcus stepped forward, raising his notebook as if proof could validate the impossible. "I've documented everything, the ridges, pulses, the symbols, the apparitions. I've made detailed notes on how fear and focus alter its influence. This isn't just folklore. This is danger," Claire interrupted. "Danger and respect. Don't think for a moment that understanding means you control it. The ridge doesn't belong to us. We belong temporarily to it whenever we approach. What we've done is survive its heart and gain insight. That's all. Tommy, still pale from the encounter, tugged gently at Claire's sleeve. They don't understand. I don't think anyone can, not fully. I saw things, people, memories, fears, all twisted. I felt them in my chest like they were my own. And yet somehow He stopped, shaking his head. I can't explain it. Claire placed her hand over his, squeezing gently. You don't have to. You survived. That's what matters. And now we bring back what we can safely share. Lessons, warnings, knowledge, not terror. The rest remains for those who choose to confront it. Carefully, deliberately, and never alone. The villagers began to gather cautiously at the edge of the field. Some recognized Claire immediately, whispering among themselves. Others were strangers who had only heard tales of the mountain's terror. A few children peeked curiously from behind wooden posts, sensing that this day would be remembered in stories. Agnes Crow, leaning on her walking stick, emerged from the shadows of her cabin. Her sharp eyes scanned the group, then softened slightly as they rested on Claire. You faced it, she said simply, voice tinged with awe and relief. And you returned. The ridge acknowledged you. Not many do. Not many can, Claire inclined her head. Acknowledged, yes. But we're not its masters, Agnes. We survived by understanding, by restraint, by unity. That's the lesson I hope the village carries forward. Agnes nodded slowly, as if weighing the implications. Knowledge tempered with humility. Yes, that is what has saved you. And perhaps others someday. Henry shifted uncomfortably, hands tightening around his cane. And Marcus? He asked, voice low. He came unprepared, arrogant, thinking he could exploit it. Did he learn anything? Marcus exhaled, rubbing his face. I've never been so humbled in my life. I thought I could analyze, record, and control. But the ridge, it teaches lessons in a way no textbook can convey. I've learned respect, yes, but also the limits of human understanding. And he glanced at Claire, and I would not have survived without your guidance. Without you, Claire, we'd all be part of its memory now. Claire's lips pressed together, a faint glow of pride tempered with the seriousness of the moment. And that's why knowledge alone isn't enough. Courage, unity, and observation matter as much as intellect. That's the only way anyone survives the heart of the ridge, the villagers murmured among themselves, some nodding, others still skeptical. Henry approached cautiously, cane tapping the earth. You've changed, Claire, he said, voice softer than before. You've touched the ridge, felt its pulse. I can see it in you, and I respect that. Even if I don't understand it fully, Claire nodded. You don't have to understand it fully. You only need to respect it. Respect is what keeps the ridge, well, less lethal. She allowed a faint smile, though the memory of the ridge's shadow still lingered in her mind. Tommy shifted, still wide-eyed. So, but what now? He asked. Do we tell everyone? Do we warn them? Or do we keep it secret? Claire considered this carefully. We share what is necessary, warnings, insights, safe practices. But we cannot convey the entirety. Some things must remain untouched for the sake of survival. Fear without understanding serves no one. Knowledge without respect is deadly. That's the balance we maintain, Agnes spoke up, her voice firm. Then your return is a blessing, not just for knowledge, but for the village. You carry the wisdom that others lacked, tempered by the humility to survive it. That is no small gift. Marcus, still clutching his journal, nodded gravely. And I will continue to record what we can safely document. But my studies are no longer about exploitation. They're about understanding and respect. The ridge is not mine to conquer, it is mine to learn from, carefully, and never alone. Claire felt the weight of the mountain behind her, in the shadows, in the whispers of the mist still lingering in the valley. She felt the pulse in her mind, faint yet present, reminding her that the ridge's heart remained alive, sentient, patient. It would test others, challenge them, but now the village had a guide, a living connection through her and her companions. Henry's expression softened further. Then I suppose I'll do what I can to prepare the village cautiously. Your courage has given us hope, and perhaps some understanding of what we face on the northern ridge. Claire nodded, acknowledging his words. Caution, yes, Respect always. Fear only as a tool for survival, never as a master. That is the lesson of the ridge, and the lesson we carry forward. The sun broke fully over the peaks, casting gold and amber across the village. The mist retreated slowly, though faint tendrils lingered in the high valleys, like reminders of the ridge's eternal presence. Claire, Tommy, and Marcus walked among the villagers, sharing measured insights, documenting safe practices, and warning against unnecessary curiosity. Children watched from the edges of fields, captivated by the stories of courage, focus, and endurance. Though shielded from the horrors that had tested the three adventurers, the elders, especially Agnes, nodded quietly, understanding the weight of what had been survived and learned. Claire felt a subtle shift in herself, a sense of purpose now intertwined with responsibility. Her grandmother's wisdom had guided her, the ridge had tested her, and the village would benefit. Months had passed since the expedition to the northern ridge, and the rhythm of village life had resumed, though subtly altered by the presence of its surviving secrets. The mornings remained mist-shrouded, the rivers sang the same familiar songs, and the forests stretched like guardians over the rugged Appalachian hills. Yet beneath this surface of normalcy, the echoes of the ridge persisted, not in fear, but in the quiet lessons learned and the vigilance cultivated by those who had faced its heart. Claire Dawson moved among the village with a new sense of purpose, her steps confident yet measured. The herbs she tended now seemed to carry an extra vitality, as if the mountain itself present, reminding her that the mountain remained alive, ever watchful. "See the patterns here," she instructed. "Water follows the land, responds to every subtle shift. The same is true of the ridge. Observe, respect, and adapt. That is survival." Marcus's latest letter had arrived that morning, carefully detailing theoretical frameworks for psychological interaction with unknown forces. Claire read it aloud to Tommy as they rested by the stream. "It's fascinating," she said, "but theory is no substitute for lived experience." "We survived the ridge because we understood more than books could teach," Tommy nodded, skipping a small stone across the water. "And we'll teach others the same way in time. Experience, caution, and trust." The sun dipped low behind the peaks, and the forest glowed in a warm golden hue. Claire felt her grandmother's presence more clearly in these moments, a subtle, spiritual guidance she had learned to interpret over the years. It was not a force that commanded, but one that reminded her of the values instilled long ago. Respect, patience, courage, and the careful stewardship of knowledge. That night, Claire walked to the edge of the village alone, looking toward the northern ridge. Mist clung to the peaks like veils of memory, and the wind whispered faintly through the trees. She felt the pulse steady and measured, and understood that the ridge was not simply a curse. It was a reflection, a test, and a living legacy of the land itself. "I survived," she whispered into the night. "And so will those who follow, but only if they walk carefully." Humbly and together, the mountains held their secrets. The village now held its knowledge, and Claire stood at the center of both worlds, guardian and guide, teacher and witness. The legacy of the ridge was preserved, not in fear, but in understanding, courage, and respect. The pulse of the mountain remained eternal, yet harmonized with the rhythms of those who had learned to live alongside it. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.